Hi, I'm Chris Wilson. Imagine you're enjoying playing your favorite online game. Its developer announces a big new update and everyone is really hyped. But just before launch, the hype vanishes. People are angry. They've somehow obtained a giant trove of raw game data exported from this update, and they don't like what they see in it. How did they get this data? Through a process called data mining. You may be wondering why I grew my beard out for this video. It's so that I can show you just how much grey hair I got having to deal with data mining over my career. In this video, I'll talk about what data mining is, how it's done, the positives and negatives for players and developers of online games, and what those developers can do about it. When you download a game onto your computer, it typically comes with all the content that may potentially be displayed as you play. This includes models, textures, sounds, numeric values, strings of text. Data mining is the process of scouring these data files to discover hidden information before it has been legitimately displayed to you while playing the game. For example, you might be able to find some unused dialogue hinting at a future quest, or the 3D model and textures of a big boss fight from that expansion. To use action RPGs as an example, players can data mine the properties of new unique items before they are discovered. They can find the full tables of what every new player skill does at each level, or user interface strings related to new crafting options. All very useful information, which may not have been provided in such comprehensive detail by the game's developers. In order to data mine a game, someone examines its data files and tries to work out what their file format is, so they can export them to a readable format and extract game assets like art or sound. If this process is difficult, they may need to decompile the game's executables to see how it is able to parse the files. Once they have the ability to export the data for the entire game, they then work out a way to calculate the changes to files that occur when an update is applied. This is then exported as a complete set of changes to the game's data that the update introduces. They can then scour it for useful information or present it on a website for other people to look at. Once this is all automated, it can occur within minutes of a new update being uploaded to the game's servers. As soon as the game update has been uploaded, and potentially days before it's playable, the community are already judging its content. If the update first appears on a test realm, this process can begin even earlier, long before it reaches the live game. By launch, the audience may feel like the update is already old news. You're probably wondering, this sounds pretty dodgy. Is it actually legal to data mine a game? Well, that's complicated, and would honestly vary depending on your local jurisdiction. Now, if you were to get legal advice, your lawyer might mention that you're breaching the game's license, where you agreed not to reverse engineer the game or extract its files. They might mention that redistributing copyrighted content infringes the publisher's rights. They may note that bypassing an access control such as encryption might breach laws such as the DMCA in the United States. But from a game developer's perspective, the practical takeaway is the same. Legal restrictions don't make downloadable information technically secret. It only takes one person to extract and publish what they find before that information spreads everywhere. They don't even need to redistribute the original assets. A written description of a boss or story event can still spoil the reveal. So, given that data mining is inevitable, is it good or bad for an online game? Let's have a look at the pros and cons. Despite being a game developer, I am the first to acknowledge there are some positives to data mining. Players get access to a whole lot of up-to-date information about the game that would otherwise be quite time-consuming to work out and keep updated. This can be really helpful for games where you need a lot of information to plan your builds. Data mining also helps players hold developers accountable to statements they have made. If there's a mistake, a miscommunication, or an inaccurate statement, it is more likely to be noticed and corrected. Data mining can also have some positive aspects for developers too. It means they don't need to have to constantly provide all this information to keep community wikis updated, because players can extract most of it themselves. It can also show developers which unreleased ideas attract interest. If players data mine some content and comment on it, the developers get an informal test of player reactions, and they can improve the content while quite reasonably pointing out that it was still a work in progress. But there are also many negatives to data mining. The big one is that it just ruins the feeling of discovery. Developers go to the effort of hiding away a bunch of cool surprises, and then data miners uncover and publish that information so that other players can plan around it. That's great for playing efficiently, but it means you're unlikely to run into anything you didn't expect. Regardless of how much of an efficient player you are, I bet your best memories in gaming were when a game actually surprised you. Live service games are designed to generate anticipation, the feeling that a new update has brought all this cool new stuff to discover. Developers really want to see a long tail of discoveries happening on social media, rather than a single info dump 5 minutes after the patch is uploaded. These days, players don't just consume the update itself, they consume weeks of predictions, teaser analysis, rumors, and community theory videos leading up to it. Another big problem is that data mined information often lacks context and can easily be misunderstood. You might data mine the properties of some new items and get an idea of how powerful they are, but not what their drop weights are or know where they came from. That's usually controlled by the server, so the client just doesn't get that information. And without the complete picture, it's easy to misjudge those items entirely. It's very common for games to include assets that are not used in the game's current version. These could potentially come from future content that is unfinished or has been abandoned, or may just be test assets that were never intended for release. These assets may confuse players because they're mixed in with all of the new finished ones, and if they're unfinished, they may raise concerns about the content looking janky. Also, if players do work out that certain content appears finished but hasn't been enabled, they may accuse the developers of holding back finished content, particularly if the game's business model involves paid DLC. So if you're a game developer working on online games, what can you do to stop players data mining those games? Well, for game logic expressed in code, it's usually easy to restrict this to only being present in server executables. But it's much harder for game assets that the client needs to display, like sound, graphics, and text. How can you keep those from being data mined? Well, it's very hard to stop it entirely, as the files we're talking about are being downloaded to the player's computer, where they are free to inspect them. Unless you're hosting the entire game client on the cloud and only streaming a video feed to the player, they're going to be able to poke around in the game's files. There are a bunch of steps you can take to limit the damage. Ideally, your production build shouldn't contain any future content, finished or not. You should keep unreleased works separated in your version control system and only merge what this update actually needs. You can automatically scrub anything that shouldn't be included before shipping the build. Automatic processes are better here because there's less chance of stuff slipping in due to human error. But what about content in this update that you want to include but want players to discover organically rather than data mining? Some developers try to hide it with obfuscated or misleading file names and directory locations, but the data are still there, and players will probably find them pretty quickly. Some developers, including me in a past life, have added in decoy assets so that players don't know what to believe, but that's a pretty wasteful process. Very good for trolling, though. So, if you can't really hide stuff in plain sight, what about encryption? Surely if you encrypt the asset archive, players aren't able to poke around in it to find stuff. Well, the issue is that encrypted data is only as secret as the decryption key, and if the client needs the ability to decrypt that archive in order to run the game, then it has to have the key. Steam actually does something similar to this, where games downloaded before their release date are encrypted, and that key is only given out on release day. But at this point, data mining is totally possible. In this case, the encryption only delays data mining rather than preventing it. If a player's machine must eventually display a model or play a sound, that information must eventually become accessible in some form. But what if we take this thought process one step further? There is a way to handle this that delays the data mining until players legitimately encounter the content, at which point they could just show other people anyway. I don't know of any games that use this technique, and it is a bit of work to set up, but could be really handy if you want to keep certain information away from data miners. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that this approach is only relevant for online-only games. It's not going to help you if your game needs to also be played offline. Okay, so here's the plan. The first thing you do is add an optional per-asset decryption layer to all of your asset loaders. For assets that aren't encrypted, which will be almost all of them, the loader behaves exactly as normal with no performance penalty. If an asset is encrypted, the loader has to decrypt it at runtime as it is loaded. This makes it very slightly slower to load the asset, but because you're only using it on content you want to keep really secret, it won't be noticeable in practice. The second thing you need to do is change the way your game communicates information about new entities to the player. Currently, when an item drops, your game server tells the client, hey, item type SwordSword7 with these properties just dropped on the ground. Your game loads all of the sounds, models, and descriptions for SwordSword7 and displays it to the player. Under the new system, the server would need to say, hey, item type encrypted content 42 with this decryption key here just dropped. The client can then use that key to decrypt and load the appropriate content files. When you release this update, there's a bunch of encrypted data that people just don't have the keys for. They can't data mine it. The decryption keys just haven't left your servers yet. When a player encounters a piece of secret content for the first time, they're sent the key, and their client can load and display it without necessarily knowing it was encrypted. Technically, they could capture and give this decryption key to data miners, but they could also just take a screenshot or video at this point because they legitimately encountered the content and it's on their screen right now. This delays the ability to data mine an asset until the point where people have actually found it, which is exactly the point where it doesn't really need to be secret anymore. You can then keep track of which content has been discovered by the community and just decrypt it fully in a future update, if you want to slightly reduce the increased load times for those assets. It's worth noting that just downloading game assets from the server on demand has the same result, where people can't data mine stuff until it has been legitimately found. The issue with this approach, though, is that it results in significant pop-in latency. My suggested approach of having assets stored locally as usual with sensitive ones encrypted and sending the key on demand almost entirely eliminates this performance problem. In addition to these technical approaches, there are also some social things that game companies can do to help make data mining less antagonistic. If you publish official accurate mechanical data, then players will not need to extract it. If you communicate patch note changes accurately, then players will learn they don't need to go looking for what you forgot to mention. If you support clear labeling of spoilers in community discussion forums, then players who want to avoid spoilers will be able to do so. So where does all of this leave us? Data mining exists because in order for games to have secrets, they generally have to store that information on computers controlled by their players. Developers may see this data as secret, but once it's on the player's computer, expecting it to remain hidden is unrealistic. This doesn't necessarily mean that data miners are entitled to do anything they like with it. There are still legal issues, license restrictions, and ethical questions, particularly when players bypass security measures, redistribute copyrighted assets, or deliberately spoil the experience for someone else. The developers also need to design around the technical reality rather than relying entirely on secrecy. Keep unreleased content out of production builds. Restrict sensitive logic to the server. Publish accurate mechanical information so players have less reason to extract it themselves. When preserving a surprise really matters, you can delay giving the client access to that information until the moment the player legitimately discovers it. Developers are never going to completely stop players from data mining. What they can do is choose what really needs to stay hidden, how long it needs to stay hidden for, and whether protecting that surprise is actually worth the extra work and all this gray hair. So maybe the useful question isn't whether players can look inside the files, it's what they'll find in them when they do. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and consider subscribing. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.